So, if the last word you got from me was that community tab post where I said I was working on a big video but was going to get hit by the hurricane, so I didn't know when it would come out because I might lose power, yeah, I lucked out a lot. It blipped twice, making my PS4 crash. That is basically the worst that happened to me. I'm not sure how. I'm in New Jersey. It got hit pretty hard by New Jersey standards. People on my street lost power for multiple days. I just got really lucky, and if you were hit by the storm, I hope you're doing alright. Just in general, I hope this video finds you alright amongst everything going on in the world, because, well, I haven't made a normal video in several months, and this is the first one in several months, so it feels weird doing this, but just in general, Definitive Edition coming out is kind of like a brick wall where I just kind of did very little other than play that, and it kind of completely killed my motivation and being in the right mindset to record a normal scripted thing, which is why nothing I have made in the past couple months has been scripted. But we're back, we're doing a normal Xeno video, and we're going to talk about party members. I don't know if this is just something I picked up on because I'm my own worst critic and nitpick everything I do, or if this is actually something other people have noticed, but I have a tendency to put more emphasis on the party as a concept than most RPG fans do. Like, obviously, the characters you play as are the most important part for interfacing with the video game, but I feel like I tend to regard party members as the only really important people and describe NPCs who I like a lot as they should have joined the party. So, I don't know if that's just me, but I do know that's probably why I like Trails so much, because everyone is goddamn playable in that series. Like, the disgruntled soldier guy whose only real job is following the bard character around and making sure he doesn't get into trouble. Yeah, he's playable. The random street gang leader who you stop as part of the prologue of the game. Yeah, he's playable. This one NPC who wants to get better at fencing. Yeah, he's playable in one fight in his side quest. So that's a thing. Basically, I wanted to talk about party members. So which one am I talking about today? I've done a few videos on various characters in the past. Well, the answer to that question is yes. I'm talking about all of them. I am going to be briefly going over every single party member in the Xeno series, including the temporary ones. But first, one must ask, what defines a party member? Normally, this would be really cut and dry, but Xenoblade 2 has to exist, where you only directly control the drivers, but they receive their power from their blades, and changing the blade changes the abilities the driver has. There is a relatively small number of rare blades, so maybe I could go over all those in addition to the drivers, but while there is a finite amount of common blade names, in terms of permutations of weapon, element, and various affinity chart skills, there is effectively an infinite amount of common blades, so I just said screw it, we're not talking about blades for Xenoblade 2. So, just because I wanted to have a cut and dry rule, I'm going to be talking about every character who can have an HP bar in the list of party members with their name on it. This gets rid of blades from the base game of Xenoblade 2, but keeps the blades from Torna, where you can control them, and there's a fairly small amount, and also keeping the AI-only guest party members in both Xenoblade 1 and 2, because there are ones in each of those games where they are a party member. If you hack them to be playable, you can play as them fine, but you just can't directly control them as the player. I still think those characters would actually count. I will be talking about backstories and secret destinies and stuff, so this will involve spoilers for the entire Xeno series, minus Xenosaga Freaks. Pied Piper is fair game. Freaks is not, because unfortunately Catgirl Cosmos is not part of her canon list of abilities, but in terms of order, I'm just going to be going game by game in release order, and within each game, permanent party members in join order, and temporary ones slotted in at the end. Also, I would like you to guess in the comments how many there are going to be, because you are probably going to be wrong, and I would like that engagement and the smug feeling of satisfaction, because I have a secret weapon that I guarantee is going to make the vast majority of people watching this video off by at least one in their count. So, without further ado, let's get into Xenogears with the first playable character in the entire series, Fei Fong Wong. He is the main character of Gears, and is an amnesiac martial artist living in Lahan Village with a strange connection to the mysterious gear known as Veltal. He sets out on his journey as an exile after accidentally destroying the village and killing a large amount of inhabitants while he was trying to defend it. On his adventure, he'll be dragged into a conflict against the Empire of Solaris and will eventually lead the group into uncovering deeper conspiracies afoot within the world. Faye has dissociative identity disorder, and one of his other personalities is Id, an extremely powerful and violent antagonist who is able to tap into Faye's unused potential. This potential comes from the fact that Faye is a reincarnation of Abel, a boy who made contact with the Zohar 10,000 years ago and has been reincarnating ever since. Ultimately, he's able to lead the party to stopping Deus, a super weapon that's trying to destroy the planet, and frees the Wave Existence, a strange godlike entity from a higher dimension, from its imprisonment within the Zohar, successfully saving what remains of the world after multiple atrocities committed by Solaris and Deus itself. In combat, he fights mostly with hand-to-hand martial arts, and pilots the gear Veltal, which is later upgraded to Veltal 2, and then later on into the titular Xenogears. Ellie von Houten is a girl from Solaris' Gebler's Special Forces unit who has a connection with Faye, despite them being on opposite sides of the conflict and only meeting after it started. She's eventually talked into defecting and helping Faye and the rest of the party. Throughout the story, she gets closer to Faye, and they do eventually become a couple. She also evolves to become a very caring person, willing to even sacrifice some of her own blood to ease the pains of a dying villain. Eventually, she is captured by Krelian in the second disc, and then later taken over by Myong, putting her completely out of playable action for most of the endgame of the story. Eventually, though, she is saved by Faye when Deus is defeated, and the Wave Existence departs. She is also someone who has been reincarnating for 10,000 years. She's an incarnation of the original Elohim, who was created by the Zohar for Abel, because he needed a mother figure, but after they both died, they were reborn as the same age, so they kept consistently falling in love and dying together. And through the actions of Faye and this Ellie, they were finally able to break the cycle and presumably live out a full life for once. One of her past incarnations is Sophia, founder of the Nissan religious sect. In combat, she fights with a staff and powerful ether attacks, and pilots the gear Vierge as well as the Omni gear El Regulus, although that is only in a cutscene. Seitan Uzuki is a doctor in Lahan village who always seems to know a lot more than he lets on. Throughout the game, he tends to guide and advise Faye, although ultimately he is an agent of Solaris who is sent to observe him, his real name being Hyuga Rikido. He answers to the Emperor of Solaris, who seeks to atone for his past actions, being the one to kill the original Abel, not the corrupt ministry which is trying to awaken Deus and destroy the world, so he does have noble intentions, and ultimately does want Faye to be a force for good. In his past, he was from a low-class family and worked his way up to having one of the highest ranks in Solaris. He has a wife from whom he got the Uzuki name from, named Yui, who he met on a mission because she was the granddaughter of his target. With her, he has a young daughter named Midori. Once Solaris is destroyed, he fully switches allegiance to the party and ultimately stopping Deus. He is a Renaissance man, skilled at almost everything he tries, but is especially fond of technology and engineering, being the one behind most of the weaponry Solaris uses. He's skilled in both unarmed and sword combat, initially not using a weapon as part of a personal code, picking up his sword once again after things get really bad. He also pilots the gear Heimdall and Omni gear El Fenris. Bartholomew Bart Fatima is the exiled prince of the Kingdom of Ave and captain of the Yggdrasil sand cruiser. He's the leader of a sand pirate force made of sympathizers to his cause, who's attempting to weaken the usurper Shakan's hold on Ave and eventually retake his kingdom for himself. While he and Faye start off on the wrong foot, he does eventually recruit him into helping him fight and take back his country. After one failed attempt to recapture the capital, he and the crew escape the kingdom on a boat version of the Yggdrasil, which is eventually upgraded into the party's airship. He later reclaims his birthright in multiple ways, claiming an Omni gear which belonged to his ancestor, and eventually retaking the kingdom and formally becoming its leader. When he first addresses his people as the ruler of Ave, he declares that he's going to turn the country into a democratic republic, which I have listed in my notes as, quote, state-sponsored democratic revolution, unquote, but I don't think it really counts as a revolution if he voluntarily is instituting democracy. But either way, he does that, and does stick with the party until the end of the game. He's also later revealed to be half-brothers with Sigurd Harcourt, a close ally who was previously thought to just be a servant of the royal family, who is also an ex-Solaris agent like Satan, and who lost his eye in the same accident Bart lost his. He's also arranged to marry his cousin because they're the last members of the bloodline left, and because even though we're getting rid of monarchies for democracy, we still have to have some uncomfortable royal traditions, because I don't know exactly. Bleh. Either way, Bart is extremely hot-blooded and rash and prone to shoot first. In combat, he wields twin whips as a way of moving past the trauma of being tortured with them as a child, and pilots the gear Brigadier as well as his ancestors Omnigear El Andvari. Ricardo Rico Banderas is the boss of the Prison D block of Kislev's capital Norturn. He's also Battling Champion, aka the best gear gladiator in Kislev, making him a top-tier gear combatant. He acts as a rival to Faye during the Kislev arc, but ultimately helps him investigate the murders of his own subordinates, and is eventually convinced to help fend off an attack on the city by Solaris, and follows Faye, Ellie, and Satan out of the city, sticking with the party from then. He has a close relationship with the informant Hammer, and is one of the most torn up by Hammer's betrayal. He is also rash and headstrong, but a little bit more reserved than Bart, although he tends to wear his anger more on his sleeve. He's eventually revealed to be the son of Kaiser Sigmund of Kislev, and the Empire's rightful heir. He fights with the wrestling moves and pilots the gear Steer, which is later upgraded into the Omnigear L Steer. Billy Lee Black is an Etone, a combat-trained priest of the Ethos faith who's tasked with overseeing an orphanage and eliminating the monsters known as Welves. He had a very hard childhood and was taken in by the Ethos after his father left and mother died, and became an Etone to support his younger sister. He has a very rocky relationship with his father once he turns back up, although he does ultimately care for him in the end, and eventually learns that the bishop who took him in was actually the Solaris agent responsible for his mother's death. He obviously does not take this very well. After defeating the bishop, he sticks with the party through the end of the game. He fights using an ensemble of various types of guns, and pilots the Gear Renmazwo, which is later upgraded into the Omnigear El Renmazwo. Maria Balthazar is a girl from the flying nation of Shavat, coming from a family of scientists. She has a connection to the powerful gear Sibzen. Her family was captured by Solaris, with her mother dying so she could escape. She serves as a guardian to Shavat and joins the party in order to defend it. Eventually, she encounters her father's mind within a Solaris gear called Octzen, a successor to Sibzen, and is capable of destroying it. It's also sort of hinted that Sibzen has some sort of remnant of her mother's soul in it. Sibzen is then later needed to access the mainland of Solaris itself, and after she does that, I don't think she has any required lines at all in the rest of the game, so yeah. She does not fight well at all without her gear, only possessing very weak physical and ether attacks. Even her on-foot fighting style revolves around summoning Sibzen to do more powerful moves. Choo Choo is a creature native to the Xenogears planet in the care of Bart's cousin Margie. She just kinda hangs out in the background, but grows to giant size to protect Maria in the Shavat arc and just kinda joins the party afterwards. She does not possess a gear at all, and grows in size to fight when the other characters use them. She's also not a very good character, so we're moving on to a much better character, being Emeralda, a sentient nanomachine colony created by a lost civilization, who is sought out by Solaris in order to use the tech for something. She was actually created by previous incarnations of Faye and Ellie, and sees herself as their daughter. She even refers to Faye as Kim, because that is the name she knew him by. She has a very young, childish personality, but can age up a bit in an optional event that does not provide gameplay benefits because it only buffs her on-foot stats, and the only remaining dungeon is a gear-only one, so that's fun. She fights using her nanomachine body to transform into different weapons, and pilots the nanomachine-enhanced gear Crescents. For optional party members in Xenogears, we have 2 generic Bart soldiers, because there are a couple fights relatively early on in the game where a generic soldier from Bart's forces fights alongside a permanent member of the party in a gear fight. These gears are weaker stripped-down versions of Bart's Brigadier moveset, and at most there are 2 of them playable at once, so bare minimum there are 2 characters to add to the total, so we'll just go with that. With that, we go to Xenosaga, starting with Shion Uzuki, main character of the trilogy. When we first meet her, she is a member of Vector Industries' first R&D division and development chief for the Cosmos project. Her backstory involves a lot of repressed trauma, and then her relationship with Kevin, her boyfriend slash fiance. I think it's kind of ambiguous as to whether or not they were actually engaged, but either way, he was the previous chief in development of the Cosmos project, who was killed when a prototype went berserk, which traumatized her even more. Personality-wise, she's a little airheaded and ditzy, although she is clearly very intelligent, although she also doesn't have the best social skills. She has a very deep bond with Cosmos that goes beyond just creator and creation, and develops and grows a lot throughout the series. One major part of her growth is Fabronia, a Realian who took care of her as a child, and the mission she gives her to save her sisters, which she eventually finds out are being kept in a terrible near-death state in order to power something, which forces Xion to make the tough decision of calling Cosmos to mercy kill them. She also remembers her childhood friend Almadel and some associated trauma with that in Xenosaga: A Missing Year, as well as learning her father might have been involved with the villains. All this comes to a head when she has to relive the Miltian conflict and remembers the truth, that she was the one who summoned the Gnosis. Even worse, Kevin is revealed to have come back as the Red Testament, and it turns out he wasn't too great a guy. He was actually an abusive, manipulative asshole who did basically all he did in order to further the plans of him and Wilhelm, who was his boss. So yeah, not great. Of course, because of all his manipulations, Xion wants to go back to him despite everything and all the terrible stuff she knows he was complicit in. Although she is ultimately turned around by the love Jin, Cosmos, and Alan have for her, finally reconciling with Jin, her brother. They did not have the best relationship for the 14 years after the Miltian conflict, but they do grow closer again over the series. She too is a reincarnation, this time of the Maiden of Mary, a woman who is very close to Mary Magdalene back in biblical times on Lost Jerusalem, aka Earth. Her power as the Maiden is needed to fully awaken Mary's soul, which is why she was needed as an important part of the Cosmos Project. After the end of the series, she is, I guess, the de facto leader of the team piloting the Elsa, going to search for Lost Jerusalem and whatever secrets may be found in the Cradle of Humanity. In battle, she fights with both martial arts she learned from her grandfather and a unique weapon called the MWS, which is a sort of shield that has a ton of different weapons loaded into it, and pilots the ES Dina alongside Cosmos. Speaking of Cosmos, she is an anti-Gnosis battle android developed by Vector Industries, and was the one to kill Kevin before he came back as a Testament. She gets periodically upgraded into new forms that are supposedly more powerful as the series progresses. She is very closely tied to Xion and always saves her even if it breaks any logic. It turns out this was actually programmed into her by Kevin, with her first priority being making sure Xion is safe because she is a vessel for the soul of Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene always saves her maiden. She slowly seems to become more human as the series goes on, initially starting out as being completely willing to kill someone if it means keeping Xion safe, but later on seeming to come to genuinely care for the rest of the party members. Technology-wise, she's rendered obsolete by Telos and almost destroyed in Xenosaga 3. Later on, it's revealed that Telos is the reanimated corpse of Mary Magdalene, who was supposed to absorb Cosmos and get the soul back, becoming the complete Mary, because Xion had done her job of awakening Mary's soul. However, she does ultimately defeat Telos in the end, becoming the one to absorb her, fully actualizing Mary in a different form. However, she breaks logic in order to save Xion's life in the end, explaining that she is not Mary, she is Cosmos. She has become someone new. In the end, she does sacrifice herself, and is seen in the last shot of the series, drifting towards a mysterious planet that might be Lost Jerusalem, and please pick this up in a new game at some point. In battle, she fights with various weapons attached to her body that also evolve as the series goes on, and pilots the ES Dina alongside Xion. Chaos is a strange boy who helps out the Kukai Foundation and possesses the power of being able to hurt Gnosis without the application of the Hilbert effect. He's just a general, kind, helpful individual who doesn't explain his past, although it is eventually revealed that he is the conscious form of the power of Anima, the failsafe for the universe, which is tasked with eliminating the lower dimensional universe if the collective unconscious gets too unstable. This realized form was originally known as Yeshua, and first came to existence on Earth in biblical times, where he met Jesus, and basically learned to be a good, compassionate person from him, and because of that, decided that he doesn't want to actually destroy the universe, which kinda is a conflict of interest, and he's trying to find a way to save the universe from its inevitable heat death without having to, well, destroy it, or go with Wilhelm's plan of constantly resetting it. He fights by unleashing small amounts of his power from his hands, and initially pilots the ES Asher with Kanan in the opening of Xenosaga 2, but later on pilots it alongside Junior. Ziggy is a cyborg man who's trying to become a full machine in order to forget his humanity. Ziggy is not his actual name, it's actually a nickname given to him by Momo, which is short for his designation Ziggurat 8. His real name is Jan Sauer, and in his past life he was a member of the Galaxy Federation's Special UMN Police Force, which is mostly explained in Xenosaga Pied Piper. All that's really touched on in the main series outside of database entries is that he has some sort of history with Voyager, the Black Testament, and that at some point he lost a wife and son. Don't worry, we're going to talk about Pied Piper a bit more when we get to those party members. Basically, he just wants to lose his humanity, whether that's letting his remaining organic parts just die or becoming a full machine, but because he gets to know Momo and care for her, he decides that he does want to live a bit longer, deciding to undergo life extension treatments which will keep him alive for a couple more centuries, which should be long enough to see Momo grow up healthy and safe. He fights using his augmented body and heavy weapons that only he's capable of wielding, and pilots the ES Zebulon alongside Momo. Momo is Momo Mizrahi, a prototype 100 series Realian created by Joachim Mizrahi in the image of his late daughter Sakura. She possesses the Y data, which has a bunch of secret information in it, which makes her a target for all sorts of miscreants across the galaxy. She was originally made to be a replacement for Sakura, because that's not a very healthy thing, and I don't think Joachim Mizrahi was in the best mindset when he thought of this, but she ended up becoming her own person, having a very sweet and caring personality as opposed to Sakura's much more tomboyish nature. She is an artificially created life form who wants to be human, which is a contrast with Ziggy, who is a human who wants to become a machine. In episode 1, she is literally a magical girl and fights with a wand and special transformations, but unfortunately she downgrades to a bow in 2 and 3, and of course pilots the Zebulon alongside Ziggy. Guinan Kukai Jr., better known just as Junior, is the URTV unit number 666, original name Rubido, a genetically engineered human designed to combat the mysterious wave existence from a higher dimension known as Udu. His childhood mostly consisted of training to fight Udu at the Yuriev Institute alongside all of his genetically engineered clone brothers under the supervision of full-time supervillain Dmitry Yuriev. Unlike most of the standard URTVs, which basically shared a hive mind, he is one of the 4 variant units which possessed a bigger sense of self. He was extremely close to 2 of the other variants, Nigredo and Albedo, and considers them his actual brothers. Albedo was also originally supposed to be part of him, and basically grew out of him at some point during gestation. I think it was basically an unintentional conjoined twin type thing, and that meant that Albedo got some of the power that was originally meant for Rubido. He was very close to Sakura Mizrahi at one point, being tasked with using the UMN to talk to her because she was deaf and mute and just completely incapable of communicating in the real world. Every non-variant URTV died during the Miltian conflict, and Junior blames himself for that. Because the URTVs were wanted, he had to go into hiding. Nigredo took up the name Guinan Kukai and founded the Kukai Foundation. Junior's power subconsciously kept him at the same age he was when the conflict happened, roughly 12, so he became Guinan Jr., basically posing as his own nephew. He has a high-up leadership position at the Foundation, and is sort of the hot-blooded character of this group, fighting with antique pistols and piloting the ES Asher with Chaos. Jin Uzuki is Shion's older brother who used to be a Federation soldier, and met with Chaos, Kanan, and the variant URTVs during the Miltian conflict. Afterwards, he left the Force and basically bounced from job to job because he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do with his life. He is one of the few people keeping in touch with old Earth culture, being really connected with old Japanese culture and beliefs. He is also very respectful of old traditions and doesn't like the fact that Shion doesn't visit their parents' graves. He even owns a house made of wood, which is legitimately a big deal according to Junior. When the series proper starts, he has just recently quit being a doctor to own a bookstore because Jin Uzuki. He cares a lot about Xion and tries to support her despite her objections and not really wanting to be around him, but is ultimately sort of able to mend the gap, although unfortunately he sacrifices himself at the end of the game to buy time for Chaos and Nephilim, and goes out like a complete badass fighting side by side with Cosmos in her most powerful form in order to save the universe. In combat, he fights with a katana and pilots the ES Ruben alone, being the only party member to not pilot an ES in tandem. Moving on to temporary Saga party members, Louis Virgil is a Galaxy Federation soldier with a past with Xion. He knew Fabronia during the Miltian conflict, and she sacrificed herself in order to save him. Rather paradoxically, this gave him a hatred of Realians, mostly because it was other Realians that killed her, and he gained some sort of poisoning from ingesting her tissue because she transplanted organs into him in order to save him, so he basically got Realian cannibalism poisoning. He joins Xion during the Woglinde invasion by the Gnosis, but is ultimately the one who is killed by Cosmos because it was a more efficient shot to go through him than around him. In combat, he uses an assault rifle, although he's later resurrected as the Blue Testament and does a lot of villainy things working to further Wilhelm's plans. He doesn't use a weapon anymore because Testament powers are ridiculous, although he ultimately finds closure and fulfillment by reuniting with Fabronia during the Miltian conflict, and is finally able to peacefully move on into the afterlife alongside Feb. Generic Kukai Foundation Soldier is perhaps the only character even better than generic Bart Soldier. Basically, a generic soldier piloting an eggs unit joins Junior for the whole UTIC ship investigation thing. Also joining Junior then is Mary Godwin. She is the sister of Shelley Godwin, and was born to genetically engineered parents, giving her a telepathic link with her sister. Because of this, they were used as testing guinea pigs for a pharmaceutical company before being rescued by the Kukai Foundation, which they now both serve. The sisters are important members of the Dorandel's bridge crew, although they do seem to answer to Junior, and when Mary joins, she is also piloting an eggs during the ship investigation. Moving on to the Xenosaga Pied Piper characters, who I put in the temporary section because they're from technically a side game. First, I want to talk a bit about the story of Pied Piper, because it's literally impossible to play this game anymore. Like, you literally need to have a Japanese phone from the mid-2000s that had this game downloaded on it, because there is no way to even buy it anymore, in any sense of the word, and I don't think anyone has ever dumped it, so it is literally impossible to play this anymore. Anyway, this is a prequel story to the series taking place about 100 years before Episode 1 and revolving around Ziggy's backstory. Someone going by the alias Voyager is using the UMN to murder people, and it's up to Ziggy's police squad to figure out who it is. The culprit ends up being Eric Weber, a close friend of Jan Sowers, and a member of the very squad tasked with hunting himself down. His motive is basically a thirst for power driven by fear of Udu, and he also has connections with Dmitry Yuriev. But, thirst for power becomes a police officer in order to more easily commit murder. I don't know if this was commentary when it was originally written, but whoo boy does it seem like it now. The end of the story basically involves Voyager directly killing Ziggy's wife and stepson, so that's why Ziggy has massive beef with him when he runs into him at the end of episode 2, and partway through the final boss fight, he gets contacted by Wilhelm and becomes the Black Testament, also trying to get Jan Sauer to become a Testament. He basically gives him the ultimatum of become a Testament and join him, or be absorbed by him, to which Jan takes the third option, which is killing himself, after which he's resurrected as a cyborg because of some very dystopian law that basically required any police officer, and I believe also military personnel, to donate their body to one of several cyborg companies to be used as a weapon even after they die. So, that's nice, but there are 4 playable party members in Pied Piper. One of them just is Jan Sauer back when he was a flesh and blood human, but there are 3 more. The first of which is Melisse Ortus, who is a subordinate of Jan, who is the typical determined young officer trying to prove herself type thing, with also shades of having to be even better than the men if she wants to be taken seriously, and overall she just matures and becomes a lot more competent as the game goes on, and at the end of the game is arrested as a suspect after Jan commits suicide, although she's eventually released on the grounds of being mentally unstable, which I don't know how true that is. Like, she might have been rattled by his death because she looked up to him, but they might have just also dismissed her testimony of Eric Weber was the killer and also transformed into a magical undead guy as her being unstable. But anyway, she becomes the founder of the anti-UMN organization Scientia. So she's actually very important to the backstory of the main series. The next character is Bugs, who is a weapons robot created by Eric Weber to assist in combat operations. He has a childlike personality and cares deeply for Eric, sort of even viewing him as a father figure, and is actually the first character to kill himself while trying to stop Eric's plans because he gets really angry at Voyager's actions and basically goes on a suicide rush midway through the final battle before he becomes a Testament. The final party member is Lactus, an early Realian model lent to the Federation by Vector for quote-unquote testing purposes. He's actually installed with Program Kanan, which is an observational program giving him the task of find people with the factor necessary to become Testaments and watch them, which is ultimately how Wilhelm became aware of Eric's actions in the first place. Program Kanan is later reinstalled into other Realians, one of them being the actual Kanan, who we'll get to in a minute. This is my secret weapon, coming up next. A character not from Xenosaga 1, 2, or 3, or Pied Piper, but from the DS remake thing of Xenosaga 1 and 2. Because Alex is some random Realian who joins for the Cosmos Simulator at the beginning of the Episode 1 portion of the DS game. He might be the same Realian Xion talks to later on in the original game. That's all I know about him. Except he fights with the rifle like most Realians that look like him do. Moving on to the Episode 3 guests though, Miyuki Itsumi is a Vector 2nd R&D Division researcher who's also working on the Cosmos project. She's very chipper and upbeat and also a weapons otaku, and is the one who makes Xion's weapons for her. She joins the party temporarily on 2 occasions in Episode 3, and, in a cool bit of continuity, fights with the MWS model that Xion used in Episode 1, while Xion uses the more advanced Episode 3 version. And here we get actual Kanan. He is a Federation Realian unknowingly installed with Program Kanan, and was present for the Miltian conflict, while also being assigned to help out the party later on, sticking with them basically for the rest of the story after the midpoint of Episode 2. He also apparently has access to Lactus's memories, and knows Ziggy as Jan Sauer. Ultimately, he did not want to do the whole observational thing because it turns out that everyone in the party has the Testament factor. He did legitimately want to help but couldn't go against his programming, so he ends up sacrificing himself to cause Voyager to self-destruct, and basically sees this as a release from his programming. Most of the time, he is an NPC who's just said to be helping out. Like, he helps pilot Asher in the beginning of Episode 2, but he's not playable, only Chaos is. He's just kind of there for cutscenes. Although, he is playable temporarily in the first dungeon of Episode 3, where he fights using a knife. He pilots Asher alongside Chaos in the opening of Episode 2, pilots Asher alone to save the party on one occasion in the present day of Episode 2, and tags along in Ruben for the ending arc of Episode 3. Our last Xenosaga character is the Giga Chad himself, Alan Ridgely. He is Xion's second in command at Vector, and has a massive crush on her that she never notices. He, in and of himself, is a legitimately talented scientist, and is not toxic in his feelings for Xion, in contrast with Kevin, because Kevin is a terrible person, and Alan is like, actually a legitimately supportive guy, and doesn't get annoyed at all when Xion rejects him or doesn't understand his feelings. He just wants her to be happy and become a better version of herself, because Alan Ridgely is a cool dude. He generally just kind of helps out with tech stuff throughout the series, but does become temporarily playable in Episode 3 in order to save Xion when she's been kidnapped. He kind of sucks, but that's the point. That Alan, despite knowing he can't do anything in combat compared to anyone else in the party, is still putting his life on the line to save the woman he loves, and this kind of comes around in the end because him being able to convince Xion to stop fighting alongside Kevin and realize that he might not be the greatest person indirectly causes Cosmos to reject Wilhelm, which indirectly saves the universe. So basically, Alan if he wasn't there, the universe would be Wilhelm's. Also, he might ultimately get a chance with Xion at the end of the game if the ending cutscene is anything to go by. And when he's playable, he uses a crossbow. He also rides in the ES Dina with Xion, he just doesn't show up in the ES combat menu. It's kind of confusing because most of the ESs are 2 seats, but Xion and Cosmos are the main characters in it. Basically, Dina was built alongside Cosmos' systems, so she has a special seat, and then there's also 2 normal seats in it. Xion takes one of them and Alan takes another one. It's also apparently impossible for a normal human to pilot an ES, so it seems like Alan, despite everything, is still superhuman in his own special way, which is cool, because Alan is a cool guy. And he's also the last Xenosaga character. It's Xenoblade 1 time, baby! And we're going to start with Dunban, the hero of the Homs, who is technically the first playable character in Xenoblade 1, which is why he's before Shulk. He is Fiora's older brother and all-around cool guy, and raised Fiora basically because their parents died when she was young. His biggest contribution to everything is at the Battle of Sword Valley, where he was able to wield the Monado despite it working against him, and repelled the Mechon threat almost single-handedly at the end because he's Dunban. And overall, he's largely just a mentor to the Colony 9 kids. He lost the use of his right arm due to the Monado, even though he's able to use it a little bit at the beginning of Xenoblade 1 before Shulk gets it, and just generally kind of helps out being a mentor, being a guide. He's also sort of a diplomat and has his big thing of having a grudge against Mumkar for betraying him and all that, which is his large plot contribution. He fights with a katana, but some of his weapons have spear or sickle, and I think maybe even axe in the name, so I guess he's proficient with multiple weapon types, even though he's using his non-dominant hand because he can't use the dominant one. Now it's Shulk time. Shulk is the protagonist of Xenoblade 1, and is a weapons researcher from Colony 9, making weapons for the C9 Defense Force. He is a big nerd and does not go outside, which, I mean, same, but I don't know how much of that is quarantine, and how much of that is just me not going outside. Very little of it is quarantine. I don't go outside. He wants to unlock the Monado secrets out of respect for his dead parents, who died on an expedition to find and recover it, on which he was actually born. That's a bit of hidden lore. He does eventually get the ability to use the Monado, and is better at it than anyone else, unlocking multiple different powers and not really encountering any of the drawbacks. He wants to stop the Mechon, get Fiora back, and then later on defeat Zenza. His ability to use the Monado, though, comes from the fact that he is a vessel for him, and then, after being discarded, comes back to life and later becomes a new god, although decides not to be one because, you know, world with no need for gods and all that. Initially, he fights with a sword he made for himself, then the Monado, then a replica Monado, and then the Monado 3, the true Monado once he becomes a god. Reyn is Shulk's best friend and a soldier in the Colony 9 Defense Force. He is the ultimate bro who just kind of loves to support his friends and is just a cool dude. He sort of has a relationship with Sharla, which is kind of leaned into as the game progresses, and is just generally all around a cool guy. He seemed to dislike Ricky, but that just more turns into a friendly rivalry where they like to take jabs at each other by the end of the game. And really, he doesn't have too much plot significance. He's just kind of there as a bro. He is a very quality himbo, I guess, and fights with a gun lance driver thing. I don't know what that weapon type is actually called because there are a few different names used in various types of Xenoblade 1 material, so that's fun. Fiora is Dunban's little sister, who's the same age as Shulk and Reyn, and has a massive crush on the former. It is worth noting that this isn't a Xion and Alan situation. Shulk very much returns her feelings. They're just very relatable in the fact that neither of them can spit it out. She also takes care of Dunban after his injury, and seems to die in the Mechon attack on Colony 9, although she's resurrected by Vinea as a vessel for Lady Maineth, Zanza's counterpart and the god of Mechonis. She becomes the pilot of the Face Mechon Nemesis, and has a connection with Maineth that's sort of similar to Cosmos and Mary's connection. After Maineth sacrifices herself, there's a bit of a thing where she doesn't have infinite energy left in her body, so she can only last for an unknown period of time, and rejects the easy route of immediately jumping in a chamber to regenerate her Hom's body, instead choosing to stick with Shulk and be by his side for the final battles, although thankfully they do defeat Zanza quickly enough and she is able to recover her Hom body at the end. She fights with dual knives, upgrading to bigger dual swords when she has her Mechon body. Sharla is a combat medic from the Colony 6 Defense Force, with the dead fiance Gato and a younger brother named Juju. She and Juju were tasked with leading the refugees, basically anyone who wasn't part of the defense force when Colony 6 was attacked, and is one of the important players in the refugee camp, although she resents the fact that she ended up safe out of the entire defense force and everyone else died. She gets close to Ryan and sort of has a relationship with him at the end of the game, which is sort of strained when Gato comes back as a brainwashed face pilot, but he basically gives them his blessing before sacrificing himself to protect the party. She is just the medic and healer of the group and fights with a specialized ether rifle. Melia Antiqua is a mysterious girl encountered unconscious in Machina Forest, who turns out to be the princess of the High Entia. She's actually a half Entia and was frequently mistreated because of it, including having to wear a mask in public, which you should all be doing right now, in order to mask her identity as a half-breed. She is instated as Crown Princess and seems to genuinely care for her people. She is a bit troubled and doesn't seem to think she's capable of leading herself, and just kind of goes through a lot of shit throughout the game, including having a crush on Shulk that he never notices and is completely sidelined once Fiora comes back, having most of her people die, having her brother die right in front of her, her father also dies right in front of her. Poor Melia, is what I'm saying. And she does ultimately get over her insecurities, although this largely comes through the bigger character development she gets in Future Connected, when she becomes a symbol of hope for the remainder of her people, and basically leads the remaining Half-Blood High Entia who were not transformed into Telethia, and reestablishes High Entia society, retakes Alchemoth, and seems to be a big proponent of research into turning Telethia back into their previous forms. In combat, she fights with a staff and powerful ether abilities, with Future Connected confirming that the elementals she controls and summons are canon. Ricky is a Napon from Frontier Village who became Hero Pawn through the power of poverty, because he needed to do something to get out of debt, and the village chief was like, yeah, be our legendary hero. Ding! He is a family man, having a very large amount of children and a somewhat strained relationship with his wife that seems to get better at the end of the game, once his debt is forgiven, basically. He's largely just around as comic relief, but does have a few wholesome moments where he shares his fatherly wisdom, because technically Melia is 88, but in terms of maturity, she's a late teenager, so Ricky is technically the quote-unquote most mature one there at 40, so he is Team Dad, basically. And in combat, he uses a biter, which is a traditional Napon weapon. Moving on to temporary party members, Dixon is an old war buddy of Dunban who joins him for the Battle of Sword Valley, and also helps out for one fight later on in the game. He's Shulk's father figure and mentor, and just an all-around worldly guy, who seems to be helping out the party by using his connections all across Bionis and even the Hidden Village. Ultimately though, he's in cahoots with Zanza and is the one to shoot Shulk to release him. He is actually a giant who is granted immortality, and later on acts as an antagonist and is mortally wounded by the party. He fights with the gunblade form of an ether rifle that seems to be a sealed version of his giant weapon, because he has a sword that's also a cannon in giant form, so I think he either designed a weapon to replicate his preferred fighting style, or he just literally sealed his giant weapon into that form. Mumkar is Dunban's other war buddy, who also helped out at the Battle of Sword Valley. He comes from a colony that was not 9 or 6, but was destroyed by the Mechon long before even the prologue of the game. However, he grew jealous of Dunban's popularity and ability to use the Monado and wanted to take it for himself, leading to him abandoning Dunban and Dixon to die, but was captured by the Mechon, and of course Dunban survived. He was captured, transformed into the pilot of Metalface, and leads the attack on Colony 9, basically deciding that he likes the power of being a Mechon, doesn't even really need the Monado anymore, even though he gets soundly defeated by the party multiple times. He is the main villain for a good chunk of the plot, and just kind of likes being evil, and is a very sadistic person. He ends up later being killed due to his own incompetence and inability to listen to Dunban at any point and trust Shulk's visions, and yeah, he just kind of dies very pathetically. He fights out of his Mechon with claws, and in his Mechon with claws, but bigger. The last Xenoblade 1 character is Alvis, the administrative computer of a phase transition facility. He is actually the AI of the Lost Trinity processor core Ontos, but poses as a general man of mystery, member of Zanza's Trinity, even though he's kind of just there to observe things, and a Ham seer for the High Entia royal family, and is also just generally an ally for Shulk, except during the part where it looks like he's an ally of Zenza. He joins the party for one fight, helping Shulk fend off a few Telethia after teaching him Monado Purge. In that fight, he fights with something called a Claymore, but it's not a Claymore sword, it's really just a reskin of Shulk's weird curved junk sword thing. Xenoblade X time! This is the one with 19 party members in and of itself, so we're going to be here for a while. Cross is the avatar character. They're made from a create a character. You decide who they are. The game says nothing. They are possibly dead inside if you choose that specific option. Elma is the real main character of X. She's a mysterious, badass blade soldier who discovers and takes in Cross, later letting them join her team. She had 2 partners in her old team who died prior to the game, and also piloted a tandem skell with an unknown hero when Earth fell. Most of the story stuff ends up focusing on her because Cross doesn't talk, and she is actually an alien. She came to Earth 30 years prior to warn it of all the danger posed by the Ganglion threat, while also bringing powerful tech allowing them to escape. Basically, she's the savior of humanity, but is pretty humble all things considered, even turning down the position of Commander of Blade. She fights with the trademark Full Metal Jaguar style of dual swords, dual guns. Lin Li Ku is a young girl who is the daughter of 2 scientists who died with Earth. She is a member of Blade, part of the Outfitter Division's R&D division. She is a genius scientist, especially for her age, and really likes Skells, wanting to fulfill her parents' dream of creating a device that would allow Skells to fly. She's generally a sweet and upbeat person, despite all the tragedy, but Tatsu kind of ruins her character half the time. She is a little bit naive, but that makes sense because, you know, she's 13, she's literally the only person younger than 18 left, potentially, of all of humanity, and is just generally the secondary main character of the entire story, eventually succeeding and creating the flight module. She fights with a shield and a Gatling gun. For the rest of X's characters, I'm not going to go in join order because you get a good chunk of them, and then also there's a huge amount of optional ones, so I'm just kind of going to go in a vague order of plot significance. Which is why next up is Lao Huang, leader of the Pathfinder team Belisarda. He fought with Doug back on Earth, and joined Project Exodus in order to ensure his wife and child were saved, but they ended up not being allowed on the White Whale. This caused him to resent a lot of the people in NLA because most of them were just rich and powerful individuals who got onto the White Whale because of their money and status, and not people he thought deserved to make it, like, you know, his dead family, who got basically screwed over by bureaucracy, and some of these people effectively took their seats. He forms a close relationship with Lin, possibly her reminding him of his lost daughter, and is an ally and party member for most of the story, but is later revealed to have sold humanity out to the Ganglion, and is fought twice, including the final boss. He sacrifices himself to destroy Luxar in the end, but does seem to have come back if the post-credit scene is to be believed. Is he a testament? Is he the Xenoblade X version of a testament? Maybe. Close range wise, he fights with a javelin, but he's much more well known as a sniper with his trademark sniper rifle. Also, he's one of those characters where I just look at them and I'm like, yeah, I know who's gonna voice you in the English dub. Like, if you made a list of characters you would expect to be voiced by Matt Mercer when you first hear about them, number 1 is any NPC in Critical Role, but then number 2 is Lao. You know this to be true. Doug Barrett is another Blade member and a member of the Harrier Division. He is close friends with Lao, them being war buddies back on Earth. He seems to be Lin's go-to test pilot when it comes to flight module prototypes, at least until Cross shows up, and is basically just the big strong guy of the group. He doesn't really do much in the plot. He fights with a photon saber and a ray gun. Gwyn Evans is another Blade, a member of the Interceptor Division, and a teammate of Arena. He worked with her deceased brother back on Earth, they were very close, and he wants to become strong to honor his memory. In general, he's a rather straightforward and earnest guy. I think he grew up on a farm, so he's just kind of the typical down-to-earth American kid. He uses a longsword and an assault rifle, and is almost as big an Arena Akalov simp as Arena Akalov is an Elma simp. Speaking of Arena, though, she is a leader of an Interceptor team, and was previously Elma's subordinate, which is why she continues to look up to her to this day. She seems to be rather aloof until you get close to her, but does genuinely care for her friends. She values family bonds a lot, possibly above everything else, because of her dead brother, and fights with a knife and an assault rifle. El Saruf is a mysterious xenoform discovered by Team Elma when they were out on a mission, and he learned English from a Lifehold archive, which is why he speaks in broken English, because he's actually speaking bad English instead of speaking his own native language, which is getting translated by the planet, because Mira be whack, yo. He views humanity with a curiosity and moves to NLA to better be among them and learn about their customs and culture and all that stuff. He's a merchant who is well acquainted with Napon traders and basically acts as a sort of guide and go-between between the Napon, although he doesn't know everything about the planet. He's also very goofy and a general jolly good guy to be around. He fights with a shield and psycho launchers. Kentaro Nagi is the Secretary of Defense for New Los Angeles and the former captain of the White Whale Arc ship. He is an ally to Blade, although he's technically not a member of the organization, and is one of the 3 main authority figures in the NLA government. He's very dedicated to his duty and fiercely protective of younger Blades, especially those who seek to protect him just because of his status. In battle, he's extremely hot-blooded and rejects the idea of just being a useless bureaucrat, choosing to fight on the front lines when necessary. He fights with a longsword, typically a katana, and a Gatling gun. Hope Alonzi is a member of the Mediator Division, who tends to stick with NLA and works like more of a counselor or social worker than a combat specialist. She's extremely kind and caring to the point of refusing to ask for or take rewards for her work. She suffers from low self-esteem due to the people she wasn't able to help, but does grow throughout the course of her affinity missions, and gets more confidence in her own abilities. She was orphaned, raised by a church, and very close to her assistant Ornella, who eventually betrays humanity to the Ganglion, which affects Hope greatly. She fights with a knife and psycho launchers. Fog Kristoff is a member of the Prospectors Division and has an older brother named Fry. He's kinda awkward and flighty, his head tends to be in the clouds, possibly hence the name Fog, and is also not the most socially competent or self-confident. He has a bad relationship with his brother that can be mended through their affinity missions, and uses the dual sword, dual gun combo. Fry Kristoff is a member of the Interceptor Division with the unfortunate nickname, although actually really awesome nickname, Killer Ostrich. Unlike his brother, he's more of the typical soldier type, being rowdy, hot-blooded, dirty-mouthed, and a heavy drinker. His conflict with Fog came when their father gave up his spot on the White Whale for someone younger, which Fry disagreed with, while Fog was able to come to an understanding with the decision even though he didn't like losing his dad. They still do both care for each other, and Fry does have a sensitive side, and he fights with a longsword and a Gatling gun. Murderous is a very abrasive and hard to work with Blade in the Curator Division, who is known for being manipulative and double-crossing, tending to steal rewards for herself. She also has a rivalry with Arena, although they do become more on good terms throughout their affinity missions. Her real name is Sharon Effinger, who was once a rich kid whose parents both died when she was young, causing her to lose everything, and apparently have a really rough childhood because of it, and she just wants to restore the family name. She doesn't actually kill people, the name is more in reference to her wanting to avenge her parents, which she ultimately does in an affinity mission, although she does not actually kill the person, she just leaves them to get killed by wild animals. Loopholes. She fights with dual swords and psycho launchers. Celica is a xenoform from the Chlorian system, and I think her race is also Chlorian, who was freed from Ganglion captivity. She is close with Rock, a engineered weapon of the Ganglion who doesn't really like fighting and decided to protect her instead of killing her, which is unfortunate because he was one of the creatures responsible for killing her village. She becomes a Blade in order to support Rock, and so he doesn't have to fight, and joins the Prospector Division. She's also very gentle and has a very proper way of speaking, and fights with a knife and dual guns. Mia is an adventurous, cheery girl who washed out of Blade training. Despite this, she explores Mira on her own and tends to get into trouble and get bailed out by Cross. She got her adventurous spirit from her dads, who were famous explorers, and instilled that love of adventure in her. She just wants to continue their legacy and explore Mira, which is a good fit both for Mira and for Xenoblade X because it's the exploration game. Eventually, she's captured by the Ganglion and held by them for an extended period of time before again being rescued by Cross, and finally being allowed to join Blade, which she does so as a Curator. She fights with a knife and a ray gun. The last 4 X characters I saved for last because in the Japanese version they were DLC. HB, or Hector Burtwhistle, is a self-centered and egotistical member of the Pathfinder Division. He wants to improve his standing in Blade and is willing to screw over others if he can get a promotion out of it. He does get a bit better at it over time, although not before forcing Cross to become his rival. He is an intellectual and rather emotionally detached, but that's because he's a true intellectual and thinks emotion gets in the way of things, although he is still outraged by injustice when he witnesses it. He fights with a shield and an assault rifle. Alexa is an outfitter and also a member of their R&D division, although she seems to focus more on the testing side, with a lot of her more engineering-inclined co-workers who know her being a bit dubious of anything she invents on her own. She likes Skells a little too much, and is also a little clumsy, which causes her to not be trusted by her co-workers, and fights with a javelin and assault rifle. Yelv is a member of the Reclaimer division, and tends to act very casual and laid back, but is an extremely hard worker and valuable asset to Blade. He does what he does in order to honor a fallen partner, and has amnesia like Cross, but unlike our favorite Blank Slate, his is actually explained. He seems to be some sort of experimental artificial life form called a J-body that had memories implanted in him. He fights with a photon saber and a ray gun. Bose Lowe's is an instructor in the Harrier division. He is obsessed with Eastern culture and wisdom and considers himself to be a true sensei to his pupils. He also likes trying to share his wisdom with others, whether they like it or not, and also has the wonderful character trait of being a racist, which is not only an affront to common decency, but also flies in the face of, like, everyone and everything else in Xenoblade X, and, like, all of the themes in the game, so he is just generally not good. He is also supposed to be the replacement for Lao, because like him, he fights with a javelin and sniper rifle, and Lao permanently leaves the party at some point, so yeah, that just makes the loss of Lao sting all the more. It is finally Xenoblade 2 time, and we can start with Rex, a young salvager from Fonset Village. He's an orphan who works to send money back to the village and to the woman who raised him and the other kids she took in. He is mostly a young, naive, idealistic sort who just wants to change the world for the better. He was trained and also partially raised by Azurda, who is an ally of the legendary hero Adam, so it's possible some of his sword skills are similar to Adam's. He meets Pyra on a salvaging job for Torna, gets killed, and sets out to bring her to Elysium, and then save the world, and save her. He is a driver, so he fights with multiple weapons because he has multiple blades. I'm assume that is implicit with every other driver character I talk about. Although he primarily fights with the Aegis Sword, Rock's dual scythes, and Nia's Catalyst Scimitar. Speaking of Nia, she is a Gormati girl working with Torna the organization. She escapes with Rex after seeing Jin kill him and joins the party after he rescues her from captivity by the Ardanian army. Also, she develops feeling for him, which, yeah, that doesn't work out. If you're a silver-haired Xenoblade girl, you're not going to get with Pro Tycoon, I'm sorry. She is not actually a Gormati though, being a flesh eater, who was awakened by an actual Gormati who was using healing blades to try and save his sister, and after she died, instructed Nia to take her into herself so she would live on in a way. She joined Torna because they were also blades who were wronged by the world, but trusts the party because they also accept her for who she is. She is very snarky and sarcastic, and that's why we love her, but she does genuinely care for her friends. Her main partner is Dromark, who is a tiger, so she is a cat who rides a bigger cat, and mostly uses his twin rings to fight. Tora is a young Napon from Torgoth, born to a family of engineers. None of them were capable of becoming drivers, so they decided to create artificial blades, because their dream was to be drivers, so goddammit, they're gonna do it with science if they can't do it with nature. He succeeds in activating Poppy with Rex's help, and joins the party to test her out, and because he looks up to Rex. He does genuinely want to do good, especially because Rex does too, and does genuinely care for Poppy, but is kind of a bit of a creep in terms of things he built into her. Yeah. He fights using Poppy's weapons, which are a shield with a drill built into it, a set of gauntlets with guns in them called mech arms, and the variable saber, which is a knockoff Aegis sword. Morag Ladair is the Special Inquisitor of Moradane, who was originally the Crown Princess and future First Empress in the line of succession, but then her younger cousin Niall was born and he became heir. She cares deeply for him, seeing him as a brother, and likes to support him as much as possible in his endeavors as an emperor to try and undo all the bad caused by their predecessors. She had a hard childhood due to expectations and general sexism, which caused her to be stern and powerful but kind, even if she doesn't show that very well. She's partnered with Brigid, and was so from a young age, becoming known as the Flamebringer, the most powerful driver in War Ardain. She starts off as an antagonist trying to stop the Aegis, but eventually joins the party as a representative of War Ardain, and because Niall recognizes she cares about Rex, probably seeing Niall in him because they're very similar. She fights primarily using whip swords loaned from Brigid. Ozzyclaris Bruna of Tantal, better known as Zeke von Genbu, Chaotic Bringer of Chaos, is the crown prince of the Kingdom of Tantal and most powerful swordsman in the country. He was kicked out for being a rebellious teen against his father and wanders the world, also working for Amalthus and Indal in various ways. He has an extremely over-the-top, great hero personality because he's trying to live up to the pop culture historical ideal of Adam that is actually surprisingly spot on. He is a bit of a joke rival character for a bit, but then joins once he's able to give his message to Rex and becomes a bit more serious and a bit more of a down-to-earth, this is the wisdom I've gained from wandering the world type character. He's partnered with the Blade Pandoria, who is mostly just an enabler for his antics, and became a Blade Eater because he was severely wounded, saving Pandora from some core crystal traffickers, and she volunteered to implant part of her crystal in his heart to keep him alive. As such, he primarily fights with Pandoria's Big Bang Edge. Before Torna, we're going to go with the temporary party members of Xenoblade 2, one of which is a major party member in Torna, but is not Malos. Malos is a member of the organization called Torna, as opposed to the Golden Country Torna, and is actually another Aegis Blade like Pyra and Mithra. He lost his main powers 500 years ago when he was defeated by Mithra, and currently seeks to destroy Amalthus and the Architect. While Amalthus is ultimately the main villain, he is the main threat, and him piloting the Artifice Ion is the final boss. He joins as an AI-only party member for part of the first chapter, and as a party member fights using the blade Sever and his sword Tonfa weapon, but once he regains his Aegis powers, uses his own Monado as the Trinity Processor Core Logos awakened in the form of a blade. He also is capable of piloting Ion at a fraction of its full power. Moving on to our actual Torna and Torna guy, we have Jin, a mysterious man who is actually a flesh eater who's been around for 500 years. In Torna, we see him as a normal blade working with Laura, and who took care of her throughout most of her life. He's a genuinely caring and heroic guy, but comes to loathe the world and especially Amalthus for taking Laura away from him. He even became a flesh eater so he would not lose his memories of her. Malos actually cared for him, so he decided to work with him with the whole get revenge on Amalthus and destroy the Architect thing. He's one of the main playable characters in Torna, and then also joins twice in the main game of Xenoblade 2. In Chapter 1 he's AI only, but in Moratha he is player controllable, as well as controllable during that one challenge mode mission. He fights using a Nodachi. Aquila Parane Solasteriol, better known by his name of Vandam, is a noble from Araya turned leader of the Garfont mercenary force. He has a big heart, taking in a lot of war orphans, doing non-combat jobs just to help people out, and only fighting for just causes. He accompanies the party through Araya after fighting them for fun and wanting to test himself against the Aegis. He is a mentor to Rex, teaching him combat stuff and his own personal philosophy, although he does ultimately sacrifice himself in order to save the rest of the party from Malos. He is unique among drivers in that he partners with only one blade, that being Rock, and he fights exclusively using his dual scythes. Moving on to Torna proper, we have Laura, a mercenary from the country of Torna, who was raised primarily by a single mother, and her horrible abusive boyfriend Gort. At one point when Laura was 10, Gort stole Jin's core crystal to try and make a quick buck, and Laura unknowingly awakened him, which caused Gort to attack her and Jin to come to her aid. She has a very close bond with Jin, and they've been together for 17 years. At the start of Torna, she's searching for her mother who might still be alive, although she does eventually find her grave. She takes Mikhail in, after finding him as the only orphan of his village, and does care for him. She accompanies Adam on his journey after a chance encounter, and supports him on his mission to save Torna from Malos. Even though she does help take down Malos in the end, she's ultimately killed by the forces of Amalthus and becomes Jin's character motivation. She fights primarily with martial arts, but also has an improvised whip. Speaking of Adam, Adam Origo is a prince of the Kingdom of Torna and pretty close in line to the throne. He's actually a bastard child, but his father still gave him the position and power out of seemingly the kindness of his heart. He doesn't really want to have royal responsibilities, he just kind of wants to be a farmy boy, but he happens to be a good leader, and people want him to succeed his father, even though he's not first in line. He has an attendant and confidant named Milton, who is a young Gormati boy who he took in after he was orphaned and made him his squire. After Amalthus, Adam is the second Aegis driver, awakening Mithra in order to stop Malos and defend his people. He also has a wife and an unborn child who very hopefully survived the Aegis War, and if they did, are probably distant ancestors to Rex. Like Zeke, he's also a very goofy and over-the-top guy, but is genuinely a very heroic figure. After Torna falls, he seals the third Aegis sword in Spirit Crucible Elpis, and goes on to found Fonset Village, which is situated around the entrance. He fights with a normal longsword. His blade, however, is Mithra, the original blade-awakened form of the Aegis core Numa. She's a very immature and uncaring individual, but grows a lot during the course of Torna, and learns to care about people and find the desire to protect them. She is deeply traumatized by her actions and the lives she ended when going berserk in her final fight with Malos at the end of Torna, and this led to the creation of Pyra, and her request to seal the third Aegis sword away, as well as sealing herself away in a separate location in order to prevent her from destroying anything again. She's still bitter about things 500 years later, and resents Rex for forcing her to come out to save him, although as Rex grows, she grows to trust and love him herself. She also has that one really good scene in Martha, and that really good Poppy scene. Mithra is somehow more wholesome than Pyra. Don't ask me how. And obviously her primary weapon is the Aegis sword, with her not even resorting to Siren at all in Torna, because apparently the Torna party members, mostly Adam, had better morals than the main game party because they didn't want her to use the Death Laser at all. Haze is a blade awakened by Laura, who is a wind element healer, and is just very kind and cinnamon rolly. She's just really sweet, seems to be the designated take care of the kids one, because she's close to both Milton and Mikhail, and has the special power to restrict blades and titans. If it has a core crystal, she can suppress it. Her core is stolen after Laura dies, and half of it is taken by Amalthus to make him a Blade Eater, which causes her to lose the memory of her name, going by Fan Lenorn once she's reawakened by Amalthus. She's later mercy killed by Jin, and if you've played Torna, I think you can agree with me when I say that, yeah, that's a release compared to whatever she was dealing with under Amalthus' control. In a way, though, she does live on for a little bit longer because Amalthus uses his half of the core crystal in order to use her blade restricting power. She fights using a staff. Hugo Ardenac is the young emperor of Morardain in the time of Torna the Golden Country. He's very earnest and upbeat, and only has his position because his brother couldn't become a driver. His brother doesn't really like him because of all that stuff, and he also has a bit of insecurity about not being the one who was intended to be the emperor. He also sacrifices himself in order to protect Adam at the end, and his preferred weapons are the classic sword and board combo. Brigid is one of the two jewels of the Empire, a powerful Ardanian fireblade. She is haughty and proud of both Morardain and her own power, which causes her to be easily irritated with and butt heads with Mithra. In the base game, she also stresses about memories and how she might not even be the same person she was in her past lives. She has a very good relationship with both of her drivers, although her Morag one might be a little closer. And she fights using whip swords. Aegeon is the other jewel of the Empire, and a powerful water blade. He is very calm and reserved, which means he doesn't really do much, even in Torna when he's a party member. And he fights using a chroma katana, being, I believe, the only Torna party member to fight with a common blade weapon. Minoth is a flesh eater created by Indal and driven by Amalthus. He knows Adam from his past visits to Indal and helps the party out against Amalthus due to having seen some of his atrocities firsthand. He is the ideal cowboy, being stern but kind, and a very cultured individual, being a playwright even after his fighting days are over. He fights with pistols that transform into daggers, and also, much later in life, had history with Vandam and the Garfant mercenaries. We can now move on to the most recent Xeno title, Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected, and the two party members it added. There's no real join order since they come at the same time, so we're going alphabetical order. Kino is an adopted child of Hero Ponriki, who was taken in when he just kind of found him alone. The rest of the family immediately accepted him as one of their own, and he was very touched by this, which led him to want to repay a perceived debt to Ricky by becoming a hero pawn himself. He even fights with a weapon made from a plant Ricky discovered that functions sort of like an ether rifle. He is very shy around strangers, but is a very pleasant kid once he opens up. Also, he is adorable. Nene is also adorable, and is also a child of Ricky, this time being a biological one. She's one of the older kids, which leads her to take care of the others because Ricky is rather irresponsible, and has a very maternal and caring personality. She's also very good at making people get along, and basically acts as a counselor to Melia and Tyrea. She fights using a paddle thing that might also be a traditional Napon weapon, or just a thing Oka made to whack her husband upside the head when he slacks off. And with that, we've gone through all of them. 75 party members. Thank you, Alex the Regalian, for making almost everyone's guesses wrong. There are exactly as many party members in the Xeno series as of Future Connected as there were fighters in Smash Ultimate as of the end of the first Fighters Pass. It is a very big number, especially for a series with a relatively small amount of games in it, and only 5 distinct universes. If you compare to Final Fantasy, it has 13 universes in the main series not counting MMOs. And I did a cursory glance, and including guests, there are only maybe 150, so double that in almost 3 times the universes. So, yeah. It seems like there are a lot more playable characters in Xeno than there are in the average RPG series, although that might really not be true. Like, again, Trails exists, but other long-running RPG franchises probably have it beat in less games. I'm not counting Suikoden here because Suikoden is a special case. But anyway, there are a lot of Xeno party members, and despite that, there are a bunch of characters in every game who seem like they will join the party but don't, or seem like they were planned to be playable at some point, and I wish were playable. So basically, the Xeno series has very good characters. I could talk about those almost party members at some point, but I think it's a good time to end things here. Thank you so much for watching if you're still here. Thank you for putting up with the weird hiatuses and the lack of videos like this, and especially thank you to all my patrons who you see on screen now for putting up with the no videos of the format that has me thank them. I thank you so much, just in general, for sticking around. I like Xeno. I like video games. I would like to talk more about video games, and with a potential Chugga-Conroy Xenoblade X Let's Play on the horizon, I am really excited for the future of the series. Also, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is now the fastest-selling Xeno game, so, like, Monolith's gonna get more money to do better things in the future. Yeah, I'm excited. But I'm also very sore in the throat. And until next time, this is Luxin signing off.